when you've written your manuscript and you want to correct it, it would be really good if you could come to it with fresh eyes. And the only real practical way to do that is to put it to one side and leave it maybe for months until you've forgotten it. But of course, deadlines are looming and you need to move on with the project, and you can't always do that. So we need to find some ways to fool the brain into thinking that it is something you've never seen before, or um, techniques for things to watch out for, um, pitfalls that you need to avoid. And that's what we've compiled here. And these are tips for manuscript checking. The first thing to do is to actually finish the manuscript. Because if you start correcting it before it's complete, the chances are that you're going to introduce more errors that won't work when the whole thing's complete. So don't start fiddling around with it until you think you've got the whole thing done. Make sure it's finished before you start correcting. Use your spell checker or any other technology that's available to you, but do use it. Don't just sit there looking at a manuscript with red squiggly lines under words. If they're flagged up, there's probably a reason for them being flagged up. But remember that things like spell checkers have limitations. They can't tell whether you mean there, the possessive there, the adverb of place, or there, the abbreviation of they are. So if you've got a mistake like that, chances are your spell checker may not pick up on it. And it certainly won't know the difference between flout and flaunt. If you use your words wrongly, it almost certainly won't pick up on it. It does depend on what tech you're using, but use the tech and recognize its limitations. Be very wary of change all. Change all is an incredibly powerful tool, and it can actually be brilliant. If you change your heroine's name from, I don't know, from Jennifer to Florence, to go all the way through and just say, change it all the Jennifers and make them Florence. That may work. But if you change Jan, that was your heroine's name, and you're going to make her Fiona, and you do all the change Jan to Fiona, you might well find that you've created a new month. Then it's going to be what? Fionary, not January. If you do change all, be aware that it is a powerful tool. Use it wisely. Use a dictionary. Before you add something to the spell checker's dictionary, make sure that you yourself know how to spell it. And also make sure that it's the right word. There are words that we use and they aren't really. They don't mean exactly what we think they mean. So if you've got any doubt, do check it before you just say, oh no, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. And certainly make sure that it's spelt correctly before you put it into the spell checker, because after that, the spell checker will just accept it every time, even though it's wrong. If you put it in wrongly, it's going to stay wrong. One of the problems when you're reading something that you've written, that you're familiar with the text, is that you expect what you see on the page to correspond to what was going on in your brain when you wrote it. And it's so easy just to gloss over it because we're familiar with it, we move on really quickly. So it's important to slow down. And one of the ways that you can make yourself slow down is by reading aloud. If you read aloud, you're much more likely to go slower. You will pick up on different and on awkward phrasing as well. You're more likely to notice if you've got two words, if you've repeated a word, or if you've omitted a word. So reading aloud is one way to slow yourself down. Another, if you put a piece of paper over the page that you're reading and only allow yourself to read the single line at the time, Or even start at the end of your manuscript and read it paragraph by paragraph, going backwards, because that way you won't be distracted by knowing the plot, knowing what's going to happen, and running on to find out the next bit of the story, even if you've written it yourself. Any of these techniques that can help us to slow down and actually read what's on the page, these are all going to help when you're trying to proofread and correct your own writing. If you've just finished writing a manuscript or a text, whatever it is that you've just finished writing, you've got to the end of it, it's still very fresh in your mind. And when you read it, you know what you were writing. If you fill up your mind with something else, you're much more likely to see the other piece with fresh eyes. So go and work on another project if you possibly can. Do some research for something else. Go and read something else, even if it's something, it's a book off your library, a book off your bookshelf. Yeah, do that. Fill up your mind with other words, and you're much more likely to see the words that you've written and not the words that you wanted to write. Some of us have sort of tics when we write that, when we type, that our fingers always write the same word, although we've got one in our minds. What we actually type is something different. Um, an example, yes. I often, instead of typing the, I'll write HET. Now, the problem with that is that het is actually an English word. And so a standard spell checker won't necessarily pick it up and flag it because, yeah, it's a word and it's spelled correctly. It's not the word I wanted. So sometimes when I know that I've been typing very quickly, I will actually do a search just to make sure that I don't have any examples of HET instead of THE. And you can do that if you begin to recognize your own habitual mistakes. That can really be helpful. One of the things that makes a professional text stand out is that it is entirely consistent. And one of the things that makes an unprofessional text stand out is that you'll find you've got double quote marks for speech on this page, you've got single quote marks down there, you've got straight quotes or curly quotes. And that happens because we come back to the manuscript, we've got things configured slightly differently. We're not paying attention. Now, as you go, it's a good idea to compile your own style guide so you know that you're using double quotes for speech, single quotes for thought, or whatever your style is, that you're always writing online as one word and not on hyphen line or on space line. And if you've got that as a style guide that you've developed for yourself, you can then do a search and find the times that you've got it wrong. And as I say, those little details, most readers won't even know that they're aware of them. But it is one of the things that makes it so easy for someone who is paying attention to spot an unprofessional manuscript. I said you could slow yourself down by reading aloud, but another way to make the words to make the words look new, to make them different, is to change the format. You can change the font, make it bigger. If you make the word bigger, then you'll find that the line breaks are all going to change, and that makes it look fresh, makes it much easier to spot things because it is new. You are seeing something that you haven't seen before. Or you may want to print it out rather than read on the screen, and that can help as well. Reading things on paper is a very different experience from reading on screen. Change the colour of the font. Change the font. Instead of having it in Times New Roman, put it in Comic Sans. You will spot things, you will see things that are different because it does look fresh. So anything you can do to change it, then obviously don't submit your manuscript in Comic Sans, put it back to Times New Roman, but just for the checking process, do something different like that. Once you've got to the end and you think you've corrected everything, take a step back, look at the big picture, look at the titles, look at the ends of pages, see whether there's anything that has become awkward because you've changed the sentence here and you've managed to push something on there or pull it back and you've got an awkward break. Check your headings, your subheadings, all of the bigger picture, just not now necessarily looking at the words, but the effect on the page. So while you are going through those headings, check your capitalization. What are your standards? Do you capitalize every word? Do you capitalize only the first word? Well, do you use a title case? Whatever your choice is, you should stick with it all the way through. So, big picture at the end. One final thought. It is really very difficult to correct your own work. We know what we wanted to write. We have idiosyncrasies. We make mistakes and we don't spot them because that's the way we speak. So actually, it is worth considering asking someone else to make corrections for you. But if you do that, do make sure you know what you're paying for, whether they're going to just make changes without discussing it, whether they're going to just flag things up and expect you to make the changes afterwards. Make sure that you are getting what you want to get out of the relationship. But seriously, do consider hiring a professional.